The wind came low and dry across the plain, carrying dust that had not felt rain in months. Redemption Ridge lay under the pale heat of an 1889 sun, a quiet, forgotten town that had once been wild with gunfire and whiskey but now moved to the rhythm of a church bell and the slow, solemn prayers of one man. The chapel sat on a small rise overlooking the few crooked streets. Its white paint had long since peeled away, leaving only with the color of old bones. Every morning, the bell rang, and the sound drifted across the empty yards, over the stables, and through the broken windows of the old saloon where no one dared to drink anymore. Father Elias Crane stepped out of the chapel as he always did, his long coat flaring slightly with the morning wind. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, though time and prayer had softened his gait. His hands were scarred, the kind of marks no plow or altar work could make. There was something about his eyes, calm, yes, but burdened, as though he'd seen too much of what men could do when mercy ran dry. Folks said he'd come from the east, or maybe from across the border, but nobody knew for sure. He never spoke of his past, and nobody had the courage to ask twice. Every Sunday, the pews filled just enough to make the place seem alive. Farmers, widows, drifters too tired to keep writing, all came to hear the priest whose voice carried more sorrow than sermon. He never preached of fire and brimstone. He spoke instead of forgiveness, of laying down one's weapons, of finding peace in the silence after violence. And yet, beneath that gentle tone, there was a stillness that made men uneasy, like he was a storm pretending to be the sky. Samuel was always nearby. The boy was 12, small for his age, and thin from too many hard winters. He had no parents anyone could recall, only a habit of sleeping by the church steps when the nights grew cold. Elias had taken him in without a word, fed him, and set him to work lighting the candles and sweeping the floors. Samuel followed the priest like a shadow, calling him father not because he believed in heaven, but because he had no one else to call by that name. One morning, Samuel brought the priest his coffee and found him staring out the chapel window toward the horizon. "Something out there?" the boy asked. "Always something out there," Elias said softly, his gaze fixed on the far hills where the heat shimmered like ghosts rising from the earth. Life in Redemption Ridge went on like a slow prayer. The blacksmith worked in silence, the general store opened twice a week. The sheriff, a nervous man named Halpern, spent more time sleeping behind his desk than patrolling the streets. No one expected much trouble anymore. The land had grown tired of blood. But trouble always finds where fear has settled. By late afternoon, 2 riders came in from the east, their horses lathered and eyes wide. They didn't stop to rest. They went straight to the sheriff's office, and before long, the sound of harried voices broke the still air. Word spread faster than wildfire. The Cutter gang was coming. Everyone in Redemption Ridge had heard the name. Jed Cutter was a man who could crush a man's skull with his bare hands and laugh while doing it. His gang rode under no flag, answered to no law. They robbed payroll wagons, shot marshals, and left bodies hanging from cottonwood trees as warnings. Cutter himself was said to be a giant of a man, near 7 feet tall, with eyes as pale as the desert moon and a smile that made even killers look away. By sundown, fear had taken the town. Shopkeepers boarded up their windows. Families packed wagons and fled toward the next county. Sheriff Halpern stumbled into the church, sweating through his vest. "Father Crane," he said, his voice breaking, "you've heard the talk? Cutter and his devils, they're riding this way. They hit a payroll wagon 2 days ago, left 8 men dead. They'll need a place to water up before crossing the ridge." Elias turned from the altar, his face calm in the glow of candlelight. "Then they'll pass through," he said, "and we'll pray they keep riding. The sheriff shook his head. "Pray? That all you got? You don't understand the kind of men we're dealing with. They'll burn this place for sport." "I understand more than you think," Elias replied quietly. Halpern blinked, uneasy. "Then you'll stand with us if it comes to it." "I'll stand where God wills me to stand." The sheriff muttered something under his breath and left. By the time night fell, the only souls left in town were those too poor or too stubborn to leave, and Father Crane among them. Samuel found him outside the chapel, staring again toward the east. The sky there was bruised purple, the stars just beginning to rise. "Are they really coming, Father?" Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Maybe. But no man ever gained peace by running from his fears." Samuel frowned. "What if they kill you?" "Then I'll pray for them on the way." The boy looked at him, that tall, silent figure wrapped in a black coat, the cross around his neck glinting faintly in the lamplight. and for the first time, Samuel saw something behind the calm. Not fear. Something else. Something sharp and hidden. That night, the wind carried whispers through the town. The sound of shutters clattering, of dogs barking at the unseen. Elias sat inside the chapel, the candles flickering before him. His Bible lay open, though his eyes were far away, lost in some memory no one dared name. Beneath the floorboards, deep under the pulpit, something metallic rested in the dirt, oiled, wrapped in an old cloth, and untouched for years. The priest's gaze lingered on the spot, but his hands did not move. Not yet. He closed the Bible softly. "Lord," he murmured, "let it pass us by." Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, a sea of silence under the moon. Then, faintly, from far beyond the ridge, came the low roll of thunder that wasn't thunder at all. Hoofbeats. Slow. Distant. Steady. The sound drifted through the canyon and into the hollow streets of Redemption Ridge, echoing off the church walls like the drum of war long forgotten. Elias Crane rose from his bench, eyes lifted to the crucifix above the altar. The candlelight danced across his face, revealing not fear but inevitability. He whispered to the empty church, "So it begins." And somewhere out there, beyond the hills, the Cutter gang rode closer, dust rising behind them like smoke before a storm. The dawn came red and restless over Redemption Ridge, burning through a haze of dust. The first sound was hooves, slow and deliberate, echoing off the dry canyon walls like thunder rolling in from nowhere. By the time the townsfolk heard them, it was already too late to run. They came out of the desert like a storm, 6 riders, all black silhouettes under the rising sun, their coats snapping behind them, faces half hidden by scarves and grit. At their center rode a man who seemed carved from stone itself. Jed Cutter. Even his horse looked mean, a great gray stallion with eyes like cold iron. The outlaw sat straight in the saddle, his shoulders wide as a doorway, his brow split by a scar that gleamed like white fire across his tanned skin. He didn't ride like a mun on a journey. He rode like a mun returning to a place that had forgotten him. As the gang thundered down the main street, dogs barked and shutters slammed. The few who hadn't fled ducked behind doors. One of Cutter's men kicked over a barrel, another spat tobacco onto a porch. They laughed as they went, mocking the silence that dared resist them. When they reached the center of town, one of them dragged the blacksmith out by his collar, slamming him against the anvil until the man's hammer fell from his hands. Cutter dismounted slowly. His boots hit the ground with a dull thud that made dust leap. He glanced once up the street, at the chapel that sat pale and still against the hillside. "Well," he said, voice deep as gravel, "I'll be damned." Still standing. The others followed his gaze. "You reckon it's true, Jed? That the preacher they're used to?" "Shut it," Cutter growled. "Let's go see for ourselves." They walked the road like they owned it, kicking at stones, spitting whiskey, until the church doors loomed ahead. The bell above was still swaying from the morning wind, but no sound came. Cutter shoved the doors open with one arm and stepped into the dim light. Inside, Father Elias Crane stood at the altar, finishing his prayer as if the world outside didn't exist. The candles flickered, casting long shadows across the pews. His voice was calm, low, the kind of calm that made men nervous because it never cracked. When he looked up, his eyes met Cutter's, and for the briefest second, the silence turned heavy, 2 worlds recognizing each other. Cutter smiled, a crooked, knowing grin. "They say you're holy now," he said, walking forward until the light caught his scar. "Wonder what the devil did to tame you." Elias said nothing. The words hung in the still air. Samuel, peeking from behind the last pew, swallowed hard. The outlaws spread out, boots echoing on the wooden floor. One knocked over a bench, another tore a hymn book and let the pages drift like ash. Cutter sauntered closer, fingers grazing the altar rail. "Fine place you got here," he muttered, pulling a flask from his coat. He took a swig, then poured the rest over the altar cloth, letting it soak through. "Never thought I'd see the day Elias Crane traded his 6-shooter for scripture." Elias's voice came soft, like wind through reeds. "This house is for prayer, not mockery." Cutter chuckled, pulling out a revolver with silver engravings. "Then let's pray, preacher. Bless these bullets for me. Give me some of that divine luck." The gang roared with laughter. The whiskey smell filled the air, thick and sharp. Elias's face didn't change. "I bless no man's weapon." Cutter raised a brow. "Funny. You used to bless plenty of 'em with your aim." That stopped the laughter. Every outlaw in the room looked from Cutter to the priest. The name hung unspoken between them, the one the desert still whispered on cold nights. Elias kept his gaze steady, though something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, but memory. 10 years ago, Cutter went on, his voice turning almost lazy, there was a man called the Pale Rider of Gila Bend. Fast as gun alive. Folks said he could hit a coin at 50 yards, or kill 3 men before they could blink. He leaned in, close enough that Elias could smell the whiskey on his breath. You remember him, Father? I do. I remember the way he left my brother dead in the sand. A murmur spread through the gang. Samuel's heart thudded in his chest. He'd never heard that name, but he saw now that Father Crane's hands had begun to tremble, not with fear, but restraint. Cutter smiled wider, savoring the tension. Didn't think I'd forget your face. Just funny how a mun like you ends up wearing a collar. He spit on the floorboards. Guess even killers need their confessions. Elias turned away, his voice barely above a whisper. I gave my life to the Lord. Then give me your blessing, Cutter sneered. Come on, preacher. Say a prayer for these bullets. Maybe the next man I put down will go to heaven quicker. Elias looked at him, and something cold passed between them. There's no blessing for men like you, Jed Cutter. For a long second, no one moved. The wind outside moaned through the open doors, scattering dust across the floor. Cutter's eyes narrowed. You still got fire in you, he said. That's good. I'd hate to see you all holy and weak. He holstered his gun, turned to his men. Let's ride. We'll be back once we've emptied this town. Before leaving, he paused at the door, glancing once more at the priest kneeling by the altar. Keep praying, preacher. I'll be back when I'm done bleeding your town dry. The door swung shut behind them, leaving the chapel quiet except for the flutter of torn-in pages and the soft creak of the bell rope swaying in the rafters. Samuel ran to the altar. Father, why didn't you stop them? Elias didn't answer. He sank to his knees, the scent of spilled whiskey and burnt candle wax thick in the air. His eyes fixed on the crucifix, but his mind was miles away, out in the desert where the sun had once burned on a younger man's face, where his gun had spoken before words could form. He bowed his head, whispering a prayer, though the words came slow and broken. Lord, spare them their sins, if you can. Spare me mine, if you will. The boy's voice quivered. Is what he said true? Were you? Go home, Samuel, Elias said, not looking up. Lock the doors. Stay inside till morning. The boy hesitated, then ran out, leaving the door half open. Night had begun to fall, painting the world in copper and shadow. Elias stayed where he was long after the last candle died. He could hear laughter faintly in the distance, Cutter's men tearing through the town, looting, shouting, breaking what little peace had ever existed. Every sound drove the prayer from his lips. Finally, he rose. His knees cracked like old wood. He walked to the pulpit and stood there in the dark, the cross glinting faintly against his chest. His hands rested on the altar, steady now, but his breath came uneven. He looked down at the floorboards, at the place where the earth hid his old life. The weight of it pressed through the planks, the cold shape of the revolver that had ended more lives than he could count. The candlelight caught on the silver edge of his cross. His fingers brushed it, trembling. Not yet, he whispered. Not yet. Outside, laughter turned to distant gunfire. Then, silence. Only the wind moved through Redemption Ridge, carrying with it the smell of smoke and the promise of blood yet to come. Elias Crane stood alone in the chapel, staring into the darkness. His shoulders were bowed beneath the burden of mercy, but somewhere deep behind those sorrowful eyes, something old had begun to stir, a spark not of holiness, but of judgment long denied. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his hands again, hands that once knew the language of the gun better than prayer. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows. He knelt before the altar and whispered into the silence, Forgive me, Lord, for what I know I will do. The wind howled in answer, and far away in the canyon, the Cutter gang's laughter faded into the night. The sun rose pale and sickly over Redemption Ridge, casting light on a town that had forgotten how to breathe. The Cutter gang had made camp in the saloon, their laughter and gunshots echoing through streets once ruled by quiet. 2 days of chaos had turned the place into a graveyard of smoke and fear. Stores were gutted, barrels split open, and wagons smoldered in the dust. Women hid behind boarded doors. Men who'd once boasted of bravery now whispered prayers they hadn't spoken in years. Jed Cutter ruled the wreckage like a god of ruin. He drank from stolen bottles, tossed coins into the fire, and watched his men gamble over the last scraps of courage the town had left. When the whiskey ran out, they went hunting for more entertainment. That was when they found Clara Boone. Clara had always kept to herself, a schoolteacher from Kansas who'd come west for a new start. She lived in a cabin near the ridge, alone since her husband died of fever the winter before. The gang dragged her through the street, laughing, calling her a prize for their victory. The people watched from their windows, frozen behind curtains. No one stepped forward. At the edge of the crowd, Samuel ran to the church, his small boots kicking up dust. He burst through the doors, his breath ragged, tears cutting through the grime on his cheeks. "Father," he cried, "they took Miss Clara. You said God protects the good. Where's God now?" Elias Crane stood by the altar, hands clasped, face unreadable. He looked older than he had days before. The lines on his face were deeper, the eyes dull with something close to shame. The boy's words hit him like stones. "Please," Samuel begged. "You gotta do something." Elias didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the cross, and for a long moment, he seemed carved from stone. Then he turned away, his voice breaking like dry wood. "Go home, Samuel." "No." The boy's shout echoed in the church. "You ain't no man of God if you let this happen." The words cut deep, deeper than Samuel could have known. Elias's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The boy ran out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick with guilt. That night, the town burned brighter than the stars. Flames flickered in the windows of the saloon, laughter echoing beneath the crack of gunfire. Inside the chapel, Elias knelt alone, shadows flickering around him. The smell of smoke crept through the cracks in the walls. He bowed his head, but the prayers came hollow. "Lord," he whispered, "show me mercy. Show them mercy." The words felt useless, falling flat against the walls. He pressed his hands together tighter, but they trembled. The memory of Clara's screams, of Samuel's voice, of the gang's laughter, all pressed against his skull until he could barely breathe. He rose and paced the aisle, eyes darting toward the pulpit. Beneath the floorboards lay the revolver, his old life buried beneath the sanctuary he'd built. He sank to his knees beside it, fingers tracing the outline of the boards, as if feeling the heartbeat of something long dormant. His mind tore in two. One voice whispered peace, turn the other cheek. Vengeance is not yours to take. The other voice, darker and older, whispered the truth he'd buried with the gun. Evil doesn't stop for prayers. He pressed his palms against his eyes, shaking. "God forgive me," he muttered. "I've been blind. I thought prayer alone could drive out the devil. But the devil doesn't listen to hymns." The church bell swung in the wind outside, its rope creaking, a sound like a broken heartbeat. Elias opened the floorboards and reached into the earth. His hand found cold metal, heavy and familiar. The cold peacemaker. His fingers closed around it, and for a moment, the years fell away. He stared at it, trembling. The steel caught the candlelight, glinting like a serpent's eye. His breath came ragged. "Maybe God doesn't send angels to stop the wicked," he whispered. "Maybe sometimes he sends men like me." He rose slowly, like a man awakening from a long, painful dream. He stripped off his collar and set it on the altar beside the Bible. Then he went to the basin of water and stared at his reflection. The face looking back wasn't a priest's. The beard made him look older, softer, like a man hiding behind holiness. He picked up the razor and scraped it away, each stroke revealing the hard jawline of the man he once was. Beneath the gentle preacher's mask was the gunslinger they'd all forgotten, the pale rider of Gila Bend. He dressed without haste. The old duster hung in the back of a trunk, its fabric stiff with dust and years. He pulled it on, the weight of it grounding him. The smell of oil and leather filled the air. He holstered the Colt, the motion smooth and practiced, like no time had passed. The belt fit his hips as if it had been waiting for him. For a long moment, he stood before the altar, staring at the cross that gleamed in the dim light. His lips moved soundlessly, a final prayer, not for forgiveness, but for strength. The candle flames danced, reflecting off his eyes like shards of fire. Behind him, the door creaked. Samuel stood in the threshold, clutching the frame. His eyes widened when he saw the gun, the coat, the clean-shaven face. "Father," he whispered. Elias turned, his voice low, steady. Go home, son. The boy shook his head. You're gonna kill him. Elias's eyes softened, but the fire beneath them burned steady. I'm gonna stop them. Samuel's voice cracked. That ain't what a priest does. No, Elias said quietly. It's what a man must do when the prayers run dry. The boy's lips trembled. You'll die. Elias stepped closer, placed a hand on his shoulder. If I do, then maybe Redemption Ridge can live. He walked past him, boots thudding on the wood, the echo of each step ringing like a drumbeat. Outside, the night waited, dark, endless, alive with the faint hum of evil. The moon broke through the clouds, washing the town in pale silver. Ash floated through the air like snow. The main street stretched ahead, empty but for ghosts of smoke. Elias stepped out, his spurs catching the light. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the smell of fire and whiskey. His shadow stretched long across the ground. From a saloon came the distant sound of laughter, Cutter's voice, booming, careless. Elias's hand brushed a gun at his side. For the first time in 10 years, the weight didn't feel like sin. It felt like truth. Samuel stood in the church doorway, watching him go, tears streaking down his face. He wanted to call out, to beg him to stop, but something in him knew better. Some moments belonged to heaven, others to men, and this one belonged to the latter. Elias walked slowly down the street, the rhythm of his spurs rising above the wind, each step a toll of judgment. The silence deepened around him, until even the night seemed to hold its breath. He didn't look back. By the time he reached the halfway mark, the doors of the saloon swung open. The gang's laughter faltered. Men spilled out into the street, blinking at the sight of the figure approaching through the haze. For a moment, none of them recognized him. He was just a shape in the moonlight, tall, unflinching, with eyes that burned like coals beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Then Cutter stepped forward, his grin fading. Recognition came slow, like the dawn creeping over the ridge. Hell, he muttered, voice dropping to a growl. He's back. But Elias said nothing. He kept walking, steady, silent, the ghost of a man who tried to bury his past and found it waiting, patient as judgment itself. The spurs rang once more, cold and clear in the night, like the final toll of a church bell calling the wicked to prayer. And Redemption Ridge, for the first time in years, began to hold its breath for salvation, or damnation, in the shape of a priest reborn into a gunfighter. The dawn crept slow over Redemption Ridge, dragging light across a town half buried in smoke. The sky was the color of ash, streaked with blood orange where the sun tried to break through. Wind whispered through the empty street, carrying the last traces of last night's fire. The silence was so complete that when a door creaked open, the sound cut like a blade through bone. Elias Crane stepped out from the church. His shirt clung dark to his shoulder where the blood from an earlier scrape had dried. His face was drawn but calm, as if peace and death had finally agreed to meet inside him. The cold at his hip hung low, oiled and ready, his hand resting near it not with tension but with certainty. He walked toward the saloon, his spurs tapping out a rhythm as even as a heartbeat. The street was empty except for broken barrels, burnt wagons, and a tumbleweed that caught on a post and spun away. Behind curtained windows, faces waited, too afraid to hope, too desperate not to watch. Samuel stood in the church doorway, clutching the frame so tight his knuckles whitened. The saloon door swung open before Elias reached them. Jed Cutter stepped into the light, dragging Clara Boone by the wrist. Her dress was torn, her face pale but unbroken. Cutter's laughter rolled down the street like thunder before rain. "Well, now," he called, squinting at the lone figure walking toward him. "Didn't think you'd actually show, preacher. You must have lost your Bible somewhere along the way." Elias kept coming, boots slow, steady. "Let her go, Jed." Cutter shoved Clara aside, still smiling. "You ain't no priest now, are you?" Elias's eyes never left his. "Guess that depends on who's asking." The gang gathered behind Cutter, 5 men, mean-eyed and drunk on victory. They shifted, uneasy under the growing light, like jackals uncertain of a lion before them. The wind picked up, stirring dust between them, and for a long, silent moment, even the earth seemed to wait. Then Cutter laughed again, loud and cruel. "You think one old gun and a prayer's gonna stop me? Hell, preacher, I buried better men than you before breakfast." Elias's voice was quiet, almost kind. "Then this time, pray you can do it again." The street froze. A tin cup rolled off the saloon porch and clattered against the dirt. A dog barked somewhere far off, and the echo hung like a bell. 6 men reached for their guns. 5 never cleared leather. Elias moved like a whisper cutting through time. No haste, no panic, just purpose. The colt barked once, twice, 3 times, each shot finding a heart before the sound of the first had faded. The 5th man spun, his revolver half-raised, before a bullet took him clean through the chest. When the dust settled, only Cutter stood. Smoke curled from Elias's gun, the smell of cordite mingling with the scent of morning rain. Cutter's grin faltered, the cocky glint in his eyes giving way to something darker. "You always were fast," he muttered, lifting his own weapon. "But you ain't faster than me." Elias said nothing. Cutter fired. The bullet tore into Elias's shoulder, spinning him half around, but he didn't fall. He straightened, his hand tightening around the Colt. Cutter fired again, another burst of fire, another crack, and Elias staggered back a step, blood running down his arm. Still he didn't go down. His eyes burned steady as the rising sun. Cutter hesitated, disbelief flickering through him. "You can't be real." Elias lifted his gun one last time. The movement was slow, deliberate, like the tolling of a final bell. His voice came low, hoarse with pain. "I'm real enough for you." One shot split the dawn. Cutter's massive frame jolted. He stared down at the hole blooming dark in his chest, eyes wide with something close to wonder. The gun slipped from his hand. He took one step, then another, his mouth twisting into a grim smile. "You still preachin', preacher," he rasped. Elias holstered the Colt, his face unreadable. "Only to the damned." Cutter dropped to his knees, his breath rattling out into the morning wind. Then he fell forward, the dust rising to meet him, and Redemption Ridge went still. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Clara ran forward, catching Elias as he swayed. His body was trembling, his shirt soaked crimson, but his eyes never left the horizon. The sun had climbed over the ridge now, painting everything gold, the saloon, the bodies, the gun still smoking in his hand. Samuel came running down the street, tears streaking his dirt-caked face. He stopped when he saw the scene, staring in awe and fear. Elias turned to him, voice soft but firm. "Help her," he said, nodding toward Clara. "Get her to the church." They walked together, Clara leaning against the boy, Elias following behind, each step heavier than the last. The town watched from behind their windows as the bloodstained figure of their priest made his slow return up the hill. The church doors groaned as they opened. Light poured in, catching the dust motes that swirled like spirits. Elias made it to the altar before his knees gave out. He knelt, one hand clutching the wound in his shoulder, the other pressing against the wood where he'd once hidden his gun. Samuel and Clara hovered near, unsure whether to speak. Elias looked up at the crucifix, his face pale, his lips trembling. "Forgive me, Lord," he whispered, voice cracked and breaking. "For I have sinned, but I did it to save your children." His words echoed softly through the empty church. Clara pressed a strip of cloth to his shoulder, tears slipping down her cheeks. Samuel knelt beside him, clutching his sleeve. "Don't die, Father," the boy begged. "Please don't die." Elias turned his head slightly, managing the faintest smile. "I ain't dying, son. Just resting a while." His eyes flicked to the window, where the first rays of true sunlight spilled through. "God's work is done here." Outside, the bell began to toll. No one had touched it. It swung on its own, moved by the morning wind. The sound rolled over the town, solemn and deep, a hymn for the dead and the saved alike. By midday, word had already spread beyond Redemption Ridge. Travelers spoke of a priest who faced down a gang and sent them all to hell before breakfast. Some said angels guided his aim. Others swore he wasn't a priest at all, just a ghost wearing a collar, come to settle debts the desert never forgot. By sundown, the bodies were buried, the saloon boarded, and the streets swept clean. But no one saw Elias leave. Some said he rode west with the rising heat. Others claimed he died there at the altar, his body vanishing with the dawn. What everyone agreed on was this: when the bells rang that morning, they didn't sound like a call to prayer. They sounded like judgment. And from that day on, when the wind swept across the ridge, the people of Redemption swore they could hear the echo of spurs, slow, steady, fading into the light, as if the pale rider still walked somewhere out in the desert, guarding the peace he'd bought with blood. By the time night fell, the town was quiet again. Smoke from the last fires curled into the starlit sky. The church stood still against the ridge, its door half open, a faint glow from a single candle flickering inside. The legend of that morning grew until it no longer belonged to the living. They said a priest saved Redemption Ridge, but those who were there, who saw him draw with their own eyes, knew better. They saw a man step out from behind his god, shoulder the weight of justice, and vanish before the sun reached its height. They saw the return of the Pale Rider, and the peace he left behind.